Let's get started. Welcome everyone to the session. It's the benefits of upgrading to OpenEdge 12, a database perspective. My name is Rob Fitzpatrick and I'm with White Star Software. I'm sure many of you have been to a White Star presentation already, so I won't spend too much time telling you about who we are. We're the oldest and most respected independent progress consultancy in the world. And that's all I'm going to say about that. We also make ProTop, which is the world's best OpenEdge performance monitoring and alerting system. And that's all I'm going to say about ProTop today. So a little bit about me. I wear a couple of hats at White Star. I'm a DBA consultant and also a software architect working on ProTop. Prior to that, I was wearing a few hats at a progress partner in Canada. With focus on the database. I've been using OpenEdge for only 14 years, which makes me kind of a beginner in this crowd. And I unabashedly love the OpenEdge database. I love using it, I love poking and prodding it, learning about it, and talking about it, which is why I'm here. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Why should you upgrade? What are the benefits there? Hopefully I can convince you of that by the end of the session. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on version numbers and the new life cycle, relatively new, but that was covered pretty comprehensively by Oleg and Rob yesterday, so I won't spend too much time there. We're going to talk about a brief whirlwind tour of some new features that are in OpenEdge 12. This is not by any means a comprehensive list. And then we'll get into sort of a high-level plan of how you would plan and execute an upgrade of your application across a major version boundary. What do you need to do? And then we'll close with a few retired features you should know about and some closing thoughts. So why should you upgrade? What's the point here? A couple of these quotes might resonate with you. You might have heard them in your organization. You might have even said them. Why do I care? I like where I am. My release works. Why should I upgrade? Why can't I just stay on it forever? And if you're presenting an upgrade to me as a solution, then what is the problem that we're solving here? Well, the problem is that you can't stay on any platform forever, whether it's OpenEdge or anything else, or your server hardware. Everything has some kind of end of life. It may be explicit, like a published end of life date. It may be implicit, it may be unexpected, like the smoke comes out of the back of your server tomorrow. So what do you do when that happens? Well, if you're going to be replacing server hardware, then you've got a new server and you're probably running a new OS. And so what's going to happen when you try to run your existing application stack, your application platform, your application code? Is it still going to work? You don't want to find out when you're under the gun that maybe it doesn't. So the last point here is the one the auditors care about in your organization, which is, are you on a retired release? Because if you are, you're never getting another bug fix, you're never getting another security patch, and your security attack surface and therefore your business risk are increasing year over year. So eventually you have to break down and do something about that. So the solution to that problem is you need to get current and you need to have a process to stay current. You need to be upgrading on a relatively regular basis, and we'll get into the life cycle and talk about why that's going to be helpful for you in the future. Once you complete the upgrade, you're also going to realize a lot of benefits from it that you'll enjoy for years to come. And in of comparing it to just staying where you are indefinitely, an upgrade is definitely the lesser of two evils. Yes, it has some costs. It's not free. It may be in terms of licensing, but not in terms of project resources and that sort of thing. It takes time and testing, but it's well worth it. Now you might say, I can't upgrade to 12 right now, and I've got a really good reason for that. Well, don't go away just yet. I've got some slides for you too if you're kind of stuck up where you are on 11. So I'm just going to zip through this. This is a little bit of a chat on the versioning scheme. Some things have changed relatively recently. The old scheme in 11 was major version.minor.servicepack.hotfix, and the new scheme is major.minor.update. So it's a little simpler, and notice the terminology change. An update is not the same thing as a service pack. This scheme applies to 12, but it also does apply now retroactively to 11.7 as well. So when do these updates come out? Roughly it's quarterly. That's not an exact cadence, but that's what recent history has shown. And if you want to know about the updates as soon as they come out, you need to be subscribed to PANS, the Progress Alert Notification Service. In fact, if you're an OpenEdge technologist of any stripe, developer, architect, DBA, technician, you need to be subscribed to PANS. It's essential reading. Every day you get a daily update about KB articles, product alerts, critical notices. Hopefully I'm preaching to the choir here and you already know this, but just in case, that's the link where you can subscribe to PANS for free. You just need a Progress ID. And here's a list of the current updates for recent releases, 12.5.2, 12.2.10, and 11.7.15. Note that if you're not using one of these 3 releases, you are on a retired release of OpenEdge. So I mentioned there's a new life cycle, relatively new. It was released in April of 2020, so that was around the 12.1 and 11.7.3 time frame, 11.7.5, sorry. And Progress introduced a long-term support model. This is becoming increasingly common in the industry. Lots of other vendors are adopting this as well. And instead of you having to decide or try to read the tea leaves in advance of what's going to be a good release to go to market with and what's going to be a short-lived release, they're now making that explicit. So every time a release comes out, they're designating it as either LTS, long-term support, or non-LTS, what they're now calling innovation releases. So there are 3 phases in the life cycle. Only 2 of them apply to the non-LTS. So the first obviously is active. If it's a non-LTS release, you should expect it to be in that phase for about 6 months, and then it goes straight to retired. So you may not even see a single update on a non-LTS release. The second phase is sunset for LTS. So an LTS release is going to be an active phase for a minimum of 5 years, could be longer. At some point, according to the policy, they declare a 5-year countdown in active phase, so that it's 5 years or more. And then once the next LTS is released, the previous LTS goes into sunset phase, and that's locked in at a 3-year duration. And then in active and sunset, releases will be eligible for updates, also for ports to new OSs, certifications, but there are no updates for either type of release once they retire. Another note here just on the difference between the old service packs and updates is that updates don't contain any new features. The feature set of a release is locked down when it ships, and the only thing in an update is Severity 1 bug fixes and security patches. So the focus on this new life cycle, this new methodology is that you can make a choice that's appropriate for your environment. So if you are, let's say, a SaaS vendor or a direct customer, and you have a limited number of environments, then you might find that non-LTS is appropriate for you because you want to get the latest features as soon as they drop, with the caveat that you're paying the price of having to upgrade frequently. Let's say every 6 months or so is probably going to be how it works out, in order to stay off a retired release. Whereas with LTS, if you're an application vendor like I used to be, then you probably want to go with the LTS model because you're going to have a long support lifetime, your customers will, and you won't be having to touch those environments as frequently, and they'll still be getting updates. And there are some links there for the policy documents if you haven't seen them. Here's a recent history of some releases. 12.2 is the latest LTS release, and 11.7 was retroactively designated as LTS. It came out before the new policy. Everything else is non-LTS. There's a note there, 12.6, which isn't out yet, will be non-LTS. According to Rob Straight yesterday, we're expecting the next LTS probably second half of next year. So next we're going to look at some new features release by release. This is not by any means a comprehensive list of features that would take all day. This is just some notable features that I've picked out that I think will make life better for DBAs on a daily basis and give you some new interesting capabilities. This is really just, I'm not going to do a deep dive on anything here. It's really just to whet your appetite, make you aware of these features if you didn't know about them, so that you can explore them further at your leisure. So we'll start off with 12.0. This should be a review for everybody. The marquee features here were the multi-threaded 4GL server, which we got to go alongside the multi-threaded SQL server, which we've had for years. It is enabled by default, although you can turn it off if you had problems with it. And it's also an enabler for the next item, which is server-side joins. Those depend on the multi-threaded server. It's also enabled by default. Should make life better for you if you've got, you know, client-server connections and you're doing complex joins on many tables. It can also be disabled if you had a problem with it, but it's on by default. And this is a feature that really spanned releases. So Progress did sort of a phased approach. In the first release, it was only for static queries, no-lock queries, and then they expanded on it in 12.1 and 12.2. Another enhancement here is -hash latch factor. It's hard to say, but easy to use. You really don't have to tune anything here, although there is a parameter for that if you want. And in a nutshell, what it is a concurrency enhancement for the buffer hash table. So in the past, there was a fixed number of BHT latches, and now the number of them scales with the size of the BHT, which in turn scales with the size of your buffer pool. A couple of smaller things, all sequences in 12 are now 64-bit. Again, you don't have to do anything to get this. It's just going to be handled for you automatically by the conversion utility. If you have 32-bit sequences, they'll be upgraded to 64. And on enterprise, large file support is enabled by default. Next up, we have an enhancement to replication. And this really deals with a scenario where you have an unplanned transition and you've got, let's say, some delay between your source and your target. So if you have, let's say, a burst of write activity on your source database and your target can't quite catch up, then in 11 what would happen is those AI blocks would queue on the source side, and then the REPL server would be sending them to the REPL agent as fast as it could, but they can queue there. So if your source goes away at that time and you have to transition your target to a source, you've now lost that queued data forever. So you've got some data loss in that scenario. In 12, the way this works is that the blocks are streamed from the REPL server to the REPL agent immediately, and the agent will queue them in a cache on the target side. So in that scenario, if your target fell behind, it would still have all the data that it needs. So if your source went away, it could simply roll forward all those blocks from this RSB cache, replication stream block cache. And then it could catch up, and so the upshot here is that you're going to have less data loss in that scenario. Some other features in 12, TDE had some old ciphers that were retired, the RC4 object cipher and the old binary dump cipher. They were not secure, so those have been replaced. RC4 was just retired, it wasn't replaced, and the binary dump was upgraded to AES, so it's a more secure cipher. If you have encrypted binary dump files under the old cipher, they'll still work. You can load them, but you can't create new ones. There are new, better ciphers for that. A couple of other minor things. OE management has been refactored. It's now a PASWE web app. And the backup counter in the database I don't know if all of you know about this, up to 11, it's a 2-byte value, so it has a maximum value of about 65,000. For most of you, this shouldn't be a problem and you'll never hit this limit, but if you were doing backups once an hour for 7.5 years, that's 65,000. So if you're in that scenario, once you get to 12.0, you now have a 3-byte counter, which you will never overflow. I only mention this because the consequences are severe. If you roll over the counter, your online backups stop working. They won't error, but they won't contain any data, so your restorers won't do anything for you. An update here to OE SQL. Whenever we talk about SQL performance, we tell people update your statistics. How do you do that? Well, you write some code like this, which is kind of ugly, and you might have hundreds or thousands of tables, so that means you're writing code to write this code, and it's a pain and it's manual. So in 12, we now have a new database service called, it's a little chart there, hopefully you can read it. It's called Autonomous Update Statistics, and this removes some of that dredge work. It can accumulate those statistics for you so that you can apply them in a maintenance window. Moving on to 12.1, we see a further evolution here of the server-side joins. They now support some dynamic queries, those that are forward-only, no lock. There are a couple of parameters that can be updated online with pro-util increase to, EC size and sec size, and replication gets some new features, a couple of VST enhancements, and also a nice little validation option on DSR util so that you can do a syntax check on your REPL properties. If you use replication, you know that that's not the friendliest thing, and it's sometimes hard to catch your typos. We have some parameter enhancements in 12.1 in terms of their default values. I'm not going to go through the list, but basically it's some caching parameters, some algorithmic parameters, and some client-server stuff. This is all good news. It's essentially just progress, putting in new default values that actually match the best practices that we've been talking about for years. This is a nice little feature in 12.2, online command line help. I don't know about you, but I've often been in a situation where I'm typing a command at 3 in the morning and I've got the brain fog. I'm, kind of not thinking too well, and I just can't remember that command syntax that I should know. And, I eventually give up and do the Google search of shame and, look it up online in the docs. And now I don't have to do that because I can just type -help after almost any command, and it'll give me this nice syntax tree here. You can even just type rfutil-help or pro-util, pro-struct, pro-backup. Most of the major commands that you use every day are supported there. Nice little quality of life feature. And finally, the old hidden menu in Promon, the this menu is not here menu, which you may know about option 6, that you need to type a secret password to access. It's now unhidden. It's menu 6 in R&D. It's called Advanced R&D, and it's got all the same options that we know about. Most of these are pretty esoteric if you've never seen these before, but there are some that are useful. The resource queues number 8, and it's now number 12, 11, the latch counts. Those can be very useful if you're investigating problems. Moving on to 12.3, this is big. If you use OpenEdge replication, if you have a big database, this might be one of the things that's holding you back from going to 12, because prior to this, when you wanted to upgrade across a major version boundary, you had to rebase your replication targets. And that's no longer the case. Progress now provides a way that you can back up the changes to the schema area on your source, copy that over to the target, and apply that to your target, and you can resynchronize without a rebase. So that's huge. And also replication was hardened so that your REPL target won't be impacted by, so your REPL agent won't be impacted by port scanners if your IT people like to do that sort of thing to you. BI space management, this is interesting. So this is a way of addressing the problem somewhat of BI growth. when it happens to you. So we know that when your BI grows, you've got two things happening in your database. You've got a long-running transaction, and you've got some source of rapid writing of BI notes. So what happens in 11 and previous is that once you run out of empty BI clusters in the cluster ring, the database has to format and insert a new cluster into the ring, and that's BI growth. It may be logical or even physical growth of the BI file. Now what can happen is that the watchdog process will scan ahead in the BI file to see if there are any clusters there that are potentially reusable. That is, they don't contain any notes about active transactions, and it can put them into the right place in the BI cluster. So in other words, it's going to defer that growth until the last possible moment, and that might give you enough time for that long-running transaction to end and thus prevent the growth. So it does have to grow eventually if the transaction lasts long enough, but this is a way of just being more efficient about when we grow. Also, some client-server parameters on secondary brokers can now be adjusted online in Promon in 12.3. This is another interesting maintenance feature. It's reorganizing a fragmented table online. So in the past, if you had some table where you've done a massive purge or you've got huge fragmentation, you would be looking at something more dire like a dump and load in IDX build. So you're going to have downtime, you're going to have to plan this activity. With the IDX build, you're going to be disabling AI, so you have to disable replication and rebase. It's an invasive process. Now with this new pro-util table reorg, you can reorganize a table in place and online. So it's not going to lock the table like a pro-util table move would. It's going to allow you to still access this table with your OLTP activity, and it's also an interruptible process. So if you're in a situation where you have a huge table and you're going to be taking your database down soon, you can interrupt it and then resume it later where you left off. So you can take on this task in pieces if you need to. And a nice little bonus feature about this is that it now represents the fastest way to get a record count on a table. If you specify this info-dash switch on a table reorg, it won't actually reorganize the table. It'll just give you a status update on the table, and you'll see here it says records found 1117. So, faster than doing a table analysis or a DB analysis on a huge area. I haven't tested this myself to see how fast it is on a huge table. I have tested it, but on a small database, but I have it on good authority from Rich Banville that this is now the fastest way to count records in your tables. Another nice feature here is maintenance mode. If you've ever been in a situation where you wanted to run some utility, like maybe a dbutil or IDX fix or something like that, and you had sort of a choice between, am I going to do this online or am I going to do it offline? Well, if I'm online, I could have users doing things that I don't want them to do. If I do it offline, I don't have a buffer pool, I don't have helper processes, so it can take longer, and I've got downtime. Now there's a new maintenance mode where you can kind of get the best of both worlds, and you can say, I want to limit the connections that are possible in my database during this activity. So you can essentially disconnect the users that don't qualify based on this DB restrict option that you put in, and you can choose DB admin, so I allow connections by database utilities, or you can lock it down further, like I was saying, I only want to pre-util data move or partition manage if you're using partitioning, or an RFUtil roll forward. We've got a new online table truncation feature in 12.4. So this allows you, let's say you had a large table and you want to just get rid of the data and you want to put it somewhere else, like you're reorganizing a particular storage area. You can purge that table and move it to another area, and the consequence here is that the blocks that used to be in that table will be given back to the free list of the storage area. So it's just a nicer way of being able to reorganize without, using the blunt force weapon of dump and load. Does require the table to be in a type 2 area. and there's no schema change required. Also a note on TDE, you can now change the DMK cipher or key online. So when TDE first shipped, if you wanted to change the DMK, you actually had to decrypt and re-encrypt the database. Now you can change this online. For example, if you want to comply with internal policy about changing static encryption keys on a regular basis. In 12.4, the BI space management feature that I talked about earlier has been refactored. Instead of being in the watchdog process, it's now implemented as a new helper process, a so-called background process. So it's the BI manager or BIM. So there's a pro BIM command, just like we have pro BIW and pro APW. So the way you enable this is you run pro BIM and then you set this BI scan time parameter to some value greater than 0. Both of which, by the way, you can do online. And if you want to drop a field, I don't know who does this, but if you care to do that, you can now do it online, and it essentially deletes the data. You don't have to wait for mass deletion to happen. It's sort of like the fast schema change, but in reverse. You're just dropping the field logically, and you don't have to lock the records to do that. Couple little features for replication. We can now protect the communication between the server and the agent with TLS. And there's an enhancement to ProShut that you can ensure that every last transaction note that was in the source, when it's shut down, gets over to the targets. That's a ProShut-REPL sync. In 12.5, we have an improvement, finally, to Pro Backup and the compression that you get with -com. For years, it's been sort of an old compression algorithm, RLE, and it's not terribly efficient. What Progress has done here is they've added a new algorithm. It's called Z Standard. It was developed by Facebook and open sourced, and it's now the new default for -com. So the good news here is you don't have to change any of your backup scripts. If you're using -com already, you're just going to get the better compression. There are a few tweaks you can make to this new parameter called com level. It's got levels 1 through 4. 1 is the old algorithm, 3 is the new default, sort of a balance between speed and compression ratio. And it's going to give you some improvements. So here's a sample of data from a Sports 2020 database. You can see that with no compression at all, without -com, it's about a 10 meg backup. With the old -com, you're going to get about a 54% improvement. That's, you know, probably jibes with your experience. You get about 2-to-1 compression, depending on your data. With the new algorithm, you get about 69%. Now that doesn't necessarily replace file compression. If you're in the habit of taking a backup, moving it to your DR system, and then compressing it with, you know, zip or gzip, there's still value in that. I took one of these backups and compressed it with gzip. I still got a further 71% reduction in size. So you don't have to change your existing processes. You'll just get backups that are a little bit smaller, which is nice for, you know, disaster recovery or rebasing replication. You're pushing a smaller file across the wire. Another nice little backup enhancement. This is an option on ProRest. If you've ever been given a backup file and been told, here, restore this, where did it come from? I don't know. What platform was it? What OpenEdge? I don't know. Well, now there's a ProRest-describe, which you can run. It won't restore a database. It'll just give you this laundry list of attributes about the backup file, and you will know where it came from and what OpenEdge you need to use to restore it, which is a nice little enhancement. And some further things here. We've got the ability now to truncate and move lobs online, and we have some enhancements to IDX Fix, performance improvement if you're scanning all tables, and some improvement to IDX Compact. You'll now get regular updates on how it's proceeding, just like a long-running, you know, ProRest dash-verbose, that type of thing. So that was a whirlwind tour of some interesting stuff, and now let's talk about what we need to do for an upgrade across a major version boundary. So this is, you know, going to be at a high level. So we're going to talk about what you need to do Basically, you're going to have some prep and research steps. You're going to do some things on the database, some things you have to do, some things you could choose to do, depending on your situation. You obviously have some application things to do. This is not going to be super comprehensive, but it's a skeleton of a plan. And then, of course, you have to test. So where you're going to start with this is with the PAG, the Platform and Product Availability Guide. And this is the Progress Bible on compatibility of OpenEdge against OSs and third-party products like Java, etc. So you need to find that. There are two of them here. The links are in the slide deck when you can download that. And you can also see that it's available on the new doc portal. And there are two of them. There's one for 11 and one for 12. And it's going to tell you about the release you're targeting, what it's compatible with, is it going to run on your OS, and so forth. So you need to read through that and make sure that the OS and the hardware that you're going to be deploying on are actually going to support the OpenEdge that you want to use. And you might find when you read this that this is going to broaden the scope of your project, and now it's not just an OpenEdge upgrade, maybe it's also an OS upgrade, and that might necessitate a hardware upgrade and so forth. So you definitely want to do this step before you submit your budget for your upgrade plan. I haven't talked about this before, but after 12.1, the JDK is no longer bundled in the Progress installer. If you've gotten used to that in 11, that you just get it for free, thanks to Oracle, we now have to install that separately. So Progress does support both the Oracle JDK, which is a paid product, or the Open JDK, which is free and open source. And there's a link there to the policy document from Progress that explains why this change is being made. It wasn't under their control. Every release in its documentation set has a what's new manual, the new and revised features, so I encourage you to look at all of those between the release you're on and the release you go to. The nice thing about 12 is that those manuals are cumulative, so if you look at the 12.5 what's new manual, it contains info on everything from 12.0 to 12.5 what's new. And this is always a good time to review your OpenEdge licensing as well. It might be an opportunity to save money. If you have products you're not using but you're still paying maintenance on, stop paying for those. And you might also have, yes, Tom, you can stop paying maintenance on products if you don't use them. Another way you could save money is if you're using Enterprise Database and you've got some add-on products, but you're not using Advanced Edition Database. This is actually a really great sales bundle. So it's the same enterprise database. What Advanced Enterprise Database is, if you're not familiar with it, is a sales bundle, is one product code that includes the database and all of the add-on products. And the way the pricing works out is if you use 2 or more add-ons, like replication and TDE, for example, it can actually be cheaper to trade in your licenses, get the advanced database, and you'll be paying less maintenance on an annual basis if you're on perpetual licenses. So in terms of the database for an upgrade, everything you have to do, one slide, this is it. You're going to shut down your database on the old DLC. You're going to truncate the BI, back up your database. Please test your backup. So restore it somewhere else, open that restored database, make sure you actually have a valid backup, or if you don't have time to do that, maybe do a mirror split, like do an OS copy of the database. Just make sure you get all of your extents if you have a multi-directory structure. And test that backup. You don't want to take a shortcut that could be career altering. And then you do have to, in some cases, disable AI and replication, two-phase commit if you use that. Bit of good news here is if you're going to 12.3 or later, Progress has removed the requirement to disable replication. So that's going to help that process. And then on the new DLC, you're going to run the conversion utility, take another backup, and then re-enable any features that you disabled. And that's really it in terms of what you have to do with the database. Of course, there are some things that you can choose to do. How are we doing for time here? Okay, 10 minutes. You know, you can look at your table and index stats, your DB analysis, and ask yourself, do I have the right structure here? You know, am I following best practices? You know, all of my storage areas are type 2, nothing in the schema area, you know, no multi-use areas, that type of thing. And look at your configuration, you know, your AI and BI settings. It's always a good time to revisit these. Look at your broker parameters. Are they appropriate? Do you understand the new broker parameters that are available to you in the new release? And don't forget about client server. That can be an important part of your performance. Take a look at your backup routine and make sure that it's in alignment with your business objectives. Do you know what your RPO and RTO are, and have they been updated recently as your business has evolved? You know, make sure that you're handling backups and AI files appropriately. And finally, on the database side, periodic maintenance. I've left this with a question mark. Do you want to do these things? It's an open question. It might depend on your situation. If you have a database that you are taking care of on a daily basis, probably it's already being maintained, and you don't want to broaden the scope of your upgrade project to do these additional things. However, if you're, let's say, an application partner, and this is your one opportunity, this upgrade project, to touch a database that only your client touches regularly, and you don't know if they've been doing maintenance, it might be a good time to, you know, use that temporary access you have to that database to ensure the health of the database, the safety of the data, and so forth. On the application side, we just have 2 slides of required tasks. So you're going to need to obviously update the systems that currently use the old DLC to use the new one. Because we're crossing a major version boundary, the compiler version number in the R code changes. So we have to recompile all our object code, rebuild PLs if we use any, and update any of your configuration files, PFs, INI files, etc., to use the new DLC path. And of course, you have to test. And it's not just about testing and saying that you tested, it's about what you test and how you test. So you have to make sure that you're using a realistic workload, that it's, you know, a multi-user, that you're exercising all parts of your application, the critical data code paths that you use, and you know, don't forget about your third-party integrations as well. You can also take this as an opportunity to look at your client startup parameters. Make sure that you understand that some have new default values, so don't have hard-coded values that are lower than those. And make sure you look at the parameters that control temp file I/O as well, because they can have a big impact on performance. So, having said all of that, you might still be in a situation where you say, okay, I have a really good reason why I can't upgrade to 12. Maybe you're on app server or web speed and you haven't migrated yet. You should strongly consider an upgrade to at least 11.7 for several reasons. You still have access to app server and web speed plus PUG, so you can migrate that code at your leisure, make sure that it works, make sure you found all your memory leaks. And you'll have the added benefit of being on a supported release. 11.7 is still getting updates, and it still will until it retires in March of 2025. And the bonus here is it's easier to do because you don't have to recompile your code, most likely, and you don't have to upgrade your database. So it's low risk and it's high reward, and it also gives you access to a laundry list of other features that I haven't talked about and I'm not going to talk about that are new in 11.7 and are really beneficial for DBAs. So, we've got a few minutes left. We're going to talk quickly about some things that go away in 12. Upgrades aren't always, there are a few things that we lose. I've already mentioned app server and web speed. They've gone and they're replaced by PUG. 32-bit database is gone. So if you're on Windows and you're using 32-bit database, you're now going to move to 64-bit database. And if you're using shared memory connections, that means you also have to migrate to 64-bit clients. So that could have compatibility concerns. You might have to do some testing, like if you use 32-bit DLLs or OCX controls, or you might have to go to client server. Also, Tranman and Dynamics go away. A couple of features that go away: the startup and stat-based VSTs no longer exist, so you should use DB params instead. It's a better table. And failover clusters is gone in 12.2. And finally, a list of platforms that go away. Some of these are not surprising, but the notable one here is AIX. Anyone here on AIX? Oh, wow, that's interesting. So that goes away in 12.6. It is still supported temporarily on 12.2 and 11.7. So a couple of closing thoughts. Keep yourself informed about what's new in the platform. There are the what's new manuals that I talked about. There's a new revised documentation portal at progress.com that was introduced recently. It's got online docs, not for all releases, only for the LTS and the most recent release, but there are downloadable PDFs for everything past and present. And if you want to influence the future of the platform, then consider joining the CVP. It gives you a lot of benefits that Rob Straight talked about yesterday, access to a private group, access to sprint demos and pre-release code, and the ability to talk to engineers who are designing new features. And the way new features get introduced is by somebody coming up with the idea for a new feature. So look into the ideas portal. You can use your Progress ID with this, and you can submit your idea for the next great OpenEdge feature. And some of the features that I've talked about today actually came into the product in that way. So there we have it. Any questions? Paul has a question.
Did you test at all the various COM levels on the backup that could affect the backup time?
Well, in as much as you can test that with a sports database. Pardon me?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, did I test the duration of backups with the new -com level parameter? And I didn't have access to a database of meaningful size. I was just using sports databases. So it's an interesting thing that I do want to test, when I can be hands-on with a multi-gigabyte or terabyte database to see how that affects it. But my expectation is that it will at least be on par with the old RLE compression. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for attending, and I hope you derive some value from this, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.